When Rishi Sunak first came into office, we talked about the fact that he could not pick his own cabinet, that he was bound by all these different factions that were going to demand that their person gets put into office. And one of those people in particular was, of course, Suella Braverman, who very, very cannily and very, very cleverly positioned herself close to Rishi Sunak to try and garner more of the right wing around his base, especially in the second election, which contributed a lot to Boris Johnson being completely and utterly destroyed in that potential leadership contest. One that he decided eventually he was not really going to stand in. So, as a result, not only was Suella Braverman rewarded, but the right chose her as someone they wanted in cabinet. Now, previously, of course, why you would ever want Suella Braverman in a cabinet position should be and always remain an absolute mystery. Suella Braverman has proven time and time again in all her previous cabinet positions that she was an absolute failure, that she was nothing more than big bluster while continuing to have failure after failure. And to be put in the position of Home Office, which is one of the top 3 jobs after Prime Minister, it's a pretty important position. And Suella Braverman continues to fumble the ball time after time, especially when one of Rishi Sunak's big 5 pledges was that he was going to get those small boats under control. One task which he has continued to fail and fail and fail again at. And now, just like Priti Patel, Suella Braverman is getting pretty desperate. So, before I go on to talking more about these new, shall we say, the new lawyer bashing that is going on by the government in an attempt to distract from its own policy failures, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, there is the YouTube thank you button and the Pony Club down below as well. So, what happened initially? Well, as I said, Rishi Sunak came out with his big 5 pledges. One, I'm going to reduce the number of those small boats, which had essentially become a big issue, made big, well, by none other than Nigel Farage as an example, as this is why, the government isn't getting hard cracking down on policy. They have not taken back control of your borders at all. Meanwhile, of course, the fact that we have left the EU and left something called the Dublin Agreement does very much hinder our ability to actually be able to control our own borders. But of course, people like Nigel Farage, Rishi Sunak, or even Suella Braverman will not admit to that. But before we go on to talk more about Suella Braverman, we've really got to talk about the previous Home Secretary. And of course, that was Priti Patel. Because under Boris Johnson, she came forward and put herself forward as she was going to solve and really crack down on the asylum issue. She even put out the very thing that Rishi Sunak and everyone on the Conservative side who's been viewed as a failure, just as we'll get into that in a moment, that Suella Braverman is herself now facing. She said, I am going to cut it down by this amount. And of course, she failed. Because the big problem we really have in our asylum system is not the fact that it's, all these big numbers coming across. It's the fact that the very system that we have in order to process asylum seekers, in order to get them through the system, to naturalize them, to make them citizens of this country, is fundamentally broken. And it was fundamentally broken by none other than Priti Patel, who on purpose has defunded the system, has reduced the number of people in order to be able to process these applications, and in doing so, has also defunded the justice system, which is also having a lot of negative effects. Now, of course, you don't tend to hear about that too much unless you really look into the issue, which we have done a couple of times on this channel. But these numbers have gotten steadily and steadily worse. Now, this has been something good for the government because, in a way, they can say, well, the problems of this country aren't us, it's all these asylum seekers, and we're having to spend all this money, which again is money that they could be putting into the system to fix the system they broke, which would make it actually work properly. We wouldn't be having this problem if they funded the asylum system and created safe routes. And we know these safe routes work because not only have they done it for Afghan people, but they've also done it for Ukrainians as well. And they have proven to be very, very successful. The only problem is they daren't do it because that makes them look soft on immigration. And they know that Farage will have an absolute field day if they were to start doing, something sensible. But just like Priti Patel, Suella Braverman is slowly coming to be seen as a failure. After all, it's under her watch that Rishi Sunak's big pledge to deal with all these small boats crossings are continually failing. It has been a complete and absolute policy failure. And remember, Rishi Sunak is being put there to try and steady the ship, to try and not potentially win the next election, but at least lose well enough to remain somewhat a viable opposition. And even at the moment, that he is not on course to even do that. And if you're Suella Braverman and you're potentially looking at a reshuffle coming probably not off in the too distant future, you really need to secure your place. After all, remember, just a couple of months ago, she went on stage and declared to everyone that she was the next natural leader of the Tory party, pretty much singling out to Rishi Sunak that she was probably maybe going to be a potential enemy who might even stab him in the back if it, well, proved to be a good opportunity for her. So she has gone to the exact same level that both Priti Patel did as well. Priti Patel also blamed lawyers. She used a very, very aggressive language against immigration lawyers, which actually resulted in not only one serious attack on an immigration office, but resulted in many lawyer officers to do with immigration having death threats. One, I think there's a believed a potential arson almost took place at one. So their language can have a very, very negative effect on these people. And this new unit that Suella Braverman has now set up to try and root out these crooked immigration lawyers, when in reality, it was one office of three people that were doing this, not the entire industry. And now, as a result, you're going to have an office that is dedicated to trying cracking down on these supposed uh, lefty lawyers who are making sure that these asylum seekers can slip through the cracks by making false claims that they were going to get tortured when they return to their home country. Is now going to make the system even worse. And unfortunately, because this is going to be so laser focused on this, you could very well end up with cases where legitimate people with legitimate concerns for their asylum application, who might very well be tortured or risk their life if they return to their own home country, could be put in that very situation because Suella Braverman is going full gun ho after all these lawyers, when in reality, it's her own policy and it's a failing of her own department, which she seems to have no idea how to control, no idea what to do, and no ideas about how to really fix the system. As we've said before, if Suella Braverman really wanted to fix the system, she would fund her system properly. She would make sure it worked and was fully staffed like it needs to be, and ultimately you would set up safe routes. This would end these small boat crossings pretty much overnight. But of course, the Conservatives can't do that because they want to be seen as tough on immigration. So ultimately, I believe Suella Braverman is going to be seen as a failure, just as Priti Patel was seen as a failure. And remember, Priti Patel, after the Johnson years, was banished to the backbenches, possibly indefinitely, and seen as someone who was a failure. And to be honest, For someone like Suella Braverman, this has been a long time coming. She is really a complete and utter failure. And to be honest, the fact that someone like her wants to be leader of the Tory party, it's worrying that the fact that she is very, very close to potentially being able to achieve that goal. And it's something we should be worrying about and making sure that, well, one more reason why we need to really give the Tories an absolute kicking in the next general election. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.